God keep our land glorious and free. Oh, Canada, we stand on guard for thee. Oh, Canada, we stand on guard for thee.
Let the doors be open, que l'on ouvre des portes. Statements by members, déclaration des députés. The honourable member from Aurora Oak Ridges.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last week, I visited Green Bowl Foods, a healthy, sustainably focused, trailblazing company in Barrie, Ontario, preparing plant-based, ready-to-eat meals. Led by Max and Banush Jamihidian, two brilliant food scientists from my riding of Aurora Oak Ridges Richmond Hill, who share a passion for transforming our food landscape while caring for the planet. Green Bowl's food is paving the way for the future of sustainable diets while tackling major global problems such as food waste. Their facility is equipped with state-of-the-art quality system, which was supported by a grant from our government, including revolutionizing thermal sterilization to enhance food preservation. Tapping into the plant-based protein sector is a major economic growth for Canada, with an estimated contribution of $25 billion to our GDP by 2035. We have the plant-based protein supercluster, which has done a great job out west. Congrats to Green Bowl, and I encourage everyone to look for their high-protein, high-fiber product online or in your stores.
The honourable member from Edmonton Manning.
Mr. Speaker, a year ago, I was on an official visit to Scandinavia when my father died unexpectedly. It was not possible to return to Lebanon to mourn with my family. My father taught me that humans are more alike than different. He taught me to respect those of different races and those who have different thoughts and viewpoints. It was not just words, that is the way he lived. He believed in bringing people together, not pushing them apart. He wanted to build people up, not tear them down. He taught me to put the needs of others first. I remember his wisdom every day and try to follow his example. On the first anniversary of his death, I rise to remember and to pay tribute to Jaber Ali Abul Taif. He taught me compassionate and service. The words thank you don't seem to be enough. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from Kitchener-Conestoga.
Mr. Speaker, Canada has over 90,000 volunteer firefighters who put their lives on the line for us every day. We depend on them for the first line of defense for many types of emergencies, as they provide essential fire and emergency services to our communities. Their dedication deserves our continued support. That's why I advocated for an increase in the tax credits for volunteer firefighters and search and rescue volunteers in the 2024 federal budget. And I'm proud of today's announcement of the increased tax credit and added supports, which recognizes volunteer firefighters' commitment to public service. With my colleagues, the parliamentary secretaries from Longueuil, Charles de Maloyne, and from Cambridge, North Dumfries, we hosted a roundtable discussion with rural fire chiefs from Waterloo Region to learn how we can best support those who keep us safe. Supports like helping with recruitment and retention, equipment costs, and health and wellness supports, and an increase of tax credits for volunteers. I'll continue to advocate on their behalf as they continue to protect us all. To our firefighters, thank you.
The honourable member for Beauport-les-Moulous. For 40 years, the OQPAC, Quebec Organization for People with Cancer, has been working in the Capitale Nationale region to help people suffering from this terrible disease and their loved ones. It welcomes, accompanies, listens to, supports, and provides relief to people who are all too often left to their own devices in the face of this illness and the disarray that it brings. These are the watchwords of the OQPAC. Very few organizations focus their activities and services on the specific needs of cancer sufferers and their loved ones. OQPAC does this wonderfully. In 2022 and 2023, this organization helped more than 3,000 people. Just imagine how many people it has helped over the past 40 years through its numerous activities, programs, groups, and individual consultations. Bravo to the dedicated members of the Board of Directors, to the volunteers, and to the General Manager, Mr. Francis Lemieux. Long live OQPAC.
L'honorable député de London West.
As we commemorate the 30th year since the genocide against the Tutsis in 1994, I reflect on the journey of reconciliation, which is a never-ending road. I can't help but notice that those who have reconciled and lived side by side did it because justice prevailed. So today, on behalf of my constituents and survivors who are still grappling with what happened in April 1994, I ask for two things, Mr. Speaker. One, that we as Canada, being a home to many survivors and families of survivors, that we designate the FDLR as a terrorist organization as it continues to kill many Tutsis in the region. Number two, that we commit to bringing the genocide participants to justice. Romeo Dallaire recently pointed to the many that have made Canada their home and live free without consequences. Last week, I saw firsthand how transformative it is when perpetrators ask for forgiveness and victims are able to provide it. There's no healing for the many grieved hearts who relive the genocide over and over again every April. And there's no justice if we leave room for denialism, revisionism, and debates that perpetrate anti-Tutsi hate. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from Simcoe North.
Today marks the 10th anniversary of the passing of the late Jim Flaherty, former Finance Minister of Canada. At the time, the news of his passing was a shock to many colleagues in this place. Sometimes a stark recognition of our own mortality is a reminder that puts our minor differences in perspective. His career was dedicated to public service. In fact, his favorite speech was entitled "Public Service is Good for You," challenging young people to enter careers of public service for its reward and fulfilling nature. Many of his accomplishments will withstand the test of time: the Registered Disability Savings Plan, the Working Income Tax Benefit, and the start of Ready, Willing, and Able. While Jim would have strong opinions on the challenges facing the country today and the budget, I suspect what would matter most are the many accomplishments of Christine and the pride he would have in his three boys: Quinn, who recently welcomed a child, Galen, who will marry this summer, and John, who works at the Ability Centre. Let us remember Jim fondly, and let us extol the virtues of public service and encourage others to rise to the challenge to serve the public good. Hear, hear.
The honourable member from Beaches, East York.
Mr. Speaker, Dr. Anne Innes Dagg, the woman who loved giraffes, was a pioneering zoologist, groundbreaking biologist, animal rights activist, feminist, and professor. She earned worldwide recognition for her studies of giraffes in the wild in 1956, wrote the Bible of Giraffes, still used by scientists to this day, and authored dozens of articles and books on giraffes, of course, but also on gender equality in academia. Anne was appointed to the Order of Canada by the Governor-General in 2019, and I don't have the time to list off her many well-earned awards and honors. But on a personal note, let me say that she was also very kind with her time. If you haven't seen Ali Reed's documentary about Anne, the woman who loves giraffes, you should. Anne took the time to join us and patiently answer questions at a screening of the film some 5 years ago. She left an impression on all of us that night, just as she now leaves a legacy for all of us in the Anne Innes Dagg Foundation, dedicated to promoting the harmonious coexistence of humans and wildlife, and built on Anne's belief that we should treat people, animals, and their surroundings with the same respect.
The honourable member from Richmond Hill.
Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to announce April is Oral Health Month, featuring National Dental Hygienist Week from April 4th to 10th. This annual event is sponsored by Canadian Dental Hygienists Association and focuses on the importance of maintaining good oral health practices and helping Canadians understand the role of dental hygiene profession in preventing and addressing oral health issues. Over 31,000 dental hygienists nationwide celebrate this week under the theme of Oral Health for Total Health, highlighting that taking care of your mouth, teeth, and gums have a positive impact on other aspects of our lives. As the federal government roll out the new Canadian Dental Care Plan, which has a focus on preventive care, dental hygienists will play a front and center role to help improve oral health outcomes for all Canadians. This April, let's help everyone in Canada learn about oral health for total health. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from Portage Lisker.
Mr. Speaker, this Prime Minister has added more to the national debt than all previous Prime Ministers combined. This costly coalition's out-of-control spending has resulted in Canada's $46 billion in spending just to service our debt. This is more money than the federal government sends to provinces for health care. Their deficits are fueling inflation and have driven up interest rates. But it's not just Conservatives pointing this out, Mr. Speaker. Both the Bank of Canada and former Liberal Finance Minister John Manley told the Prime Minister that he was pressing on the inflationary gas pedal. And now a leading economist says interest rates cuts may be delayed because of high government spending. But Conservatives have a plan to fix the budget. In next week's budget, the Liberals need to cap the spending with a dollar-for-dollar rule to bring down interest rates and inflation. They must find $1 in savings for every new dollar in spending. It's just common sense. Because my 3-month-old daughter Maeve and her generation should not be shackled to pay the bill of the reckless spending of this costly coalition.
The honourable member from Humber River Black Creek.
Speaker, I stand in the House today with a heavy heart as we mourn one of the worst earthquakes to strike Taiwan in the last 25 years, with at least 16 dead and more than 1,000 people injured. Many homes and businesses have been destroyed and communities shattered. In the face of this tragedy, we witness the remarkable resilience of the Taiwanese people. As we extend our thoughts and prayers to those affected, let us also recognize the unwavering determination of the Taiwanese people. It's important to acknowledge that Taiwan has been an ally to so many nations in their times of need. Their generosity and compassion have touched lives around the world. Now it is our turn to offer our unwavering support to the people of Taiwan. In this time of devastation, Canada extends our hand in friendship and assistance to Taiwan as they recover from this earthquake. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from Prince George, Peace River, Northern Rockies.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. After 8 years, Northern Canadians cannot afford this Prime Minister anymore. Housing starts are at historic lows according to a recent RBC report, and this trend is only going to get worse under these NDP Liberals. Nunavut is deep in this housing crisis with over 3,000 homes desperately needed and climbing, with little being done by this Prime Minister. The NDP Liberal Prime Minister has no plan to fix the housing crisis, according to his own Housing Department CEO. And making life far worse, the Liberal carbon tax is applied to farmers. A package of hot dogs in Nunavut is $19. 1 gallon of ice cream is $29. 1 kilogram of bacon is $42. Canadians are tired of being told that they're better off under this Prime Minister because it simply isn't true. When will this Prime Minister make life better in the North, axe the tax on farmers, and build the homes?
The honourable member from Peterborough, Kawartha.
After 8 years of this Liberal NDP Prime Minister, Canadians require 64% of their pre-taxed income to afford housing, if they can even find housing. Michelle from Kawartha Lakes found work in Toronto, but is couch surfing because she, like 9 in 10 Canadians in this country, believe they will never own a home. We are a G7 country, and it is over $1,900 for a one-bedroom apartment. Rent has doubled, mortgage defaults are on the rise, and housing starts are down. 10 cities across this country look like scenes from the Great Depression, and this Prime Minister has the audacity to say he's doing a great job. He's a failure. His solution? Increase the carbon tax by 23%, which will drive up housing prices even more. Canadians know better, and so do Conservatives. We will incentivize municipalities to build houses people can afford, and we will axe the tax to make the materials needed to build houses affordable. We will bring it home.
The honourable member from Don Valley West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today I congratulate the community at Bessborough Drive Elementary and Middle School on its 100th anniversary. With its opening in December 1923, Bessborough became the first public school in Leaside and even served as the community's town hall. Wow. For a century, Bessborough Public School has been a place of academic excellence, committed to nurturing the minds of generations past, present, and future. Through my regular conversations with students, parents, and faculty, it's abundantly clear that Bessborough is more than an institution. It holds a special place in the hearts of many, with a legacy of familial ties spanning generations, from grandparents and parents to today's students, all proudly waving the Bessborough flag. On this great occasion, I extend my deep appreciation to the dedicated faculty, volunteers, and students who have contributed to the enduring legacy of Bessborough Public School. May this milestone continue excellence for generations to come. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Hear, hear. Colleagues, you may want to keep the noise down because we're going to be listening to the next intervention in the Nuktatuk. The honourable member from Nunavut.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I don't always have celebratory statements in this place. Although many people are still struggling, there are some worth sharing. Nunavut reached a milestone because of Tagak Curley's vision. And that because Tagak Curley's vision became a reality. I thank him for retaining Inuit laws, values, and principles taught to him by our ancestors. I thank him for helping to modernize Inuit society by leading the way for Inuit to govern. Through his vision, community negotiators worked with elders and community members what terms to include in what would later become the Nunavut Land Claim Agreement. I thank the community negotiators.
The Honourable Member for Pierre Boucher-les Patriotes Verchères. To promote the French language in Quebec, we need to share it with all new Quebecers. But of course, our national language can't be learned overnight. And that's why I'd like to salute the initiative by Provigo and Boucherville that warmed the hearts of all Quebecers. The grocery store provides all its new employees with a button that reads, J'apprends le français. Merci de parler lentement, which means I'm learning French. Thank you for speaking slowly. What an extraordinary way to encourage employees while they learn. What an extraordinary way to encourage customers to take part in this learning process through cooperation, patience, and kindness. On behalf of the Bloc Québécois, I'd like to thank the owner of Provigo, Mona Turbide, and the person in charge of the French language training, Martine Colombe. I'd also like to congratulate all the French education workers for their perseverance, and I hope that this initiative will snowball throughout Quebec. Thank you.
The honourable member from Barrie-Innisfil.
Canadian families and businesses are paying the price with an NDP Liberal government that's addicted to debt and deficits. Record high deficits and carbon taxes driving up inflation are increasing the costs on everything, including the necessities of life. Interest rate increases fueled by NDP Liberal spending and increased debt is punishing Canadian families and businesses, and we're just now starting to see the full impact increases in mortgage rates are having on mortgage renewals, and it's a crisis. No Prime Minister has added more to the national debt than this one, and through it all, he's been aided and abetted by his NDP coalition partners. Anyone who has any sense at all knows you don't put more fuel on an already out-of-control debt and deficit fire. It's time for a return to fiscal common sense in this country that sees a government cap spending to bring down interest rates and inflation with a dollar-for-dollar rule that finds $1 in savings for every new dollar spent. Common sense conservatives will not support the budget unless it acts as the tax, builds homes, not photo ops, and caps spending.
Here, here, here. The honourable member from Winnipeg North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. April is Sikh Heritage Month, and no matter where it is you go in Canada, you'll find an intense amount of pride in Sikh heritage, Mr. Speaker. The many contributions in every aspect of our society. It's a great pleasure for me to be able to stand in my place and recognize the month as a significant time for us to appreciate, love, and better understand Sikhism and how it contributes to the very fabric of Canadian society, Mr. Speaker. I would encourage members to visit Agudwada, talk to members of our Punjabi heritage community, get a better understanding of how Sikhism affects our Canadian heritage. It's something all of us should embrace, no matter what our faith is, Mr. Speaker. So let's encourage our constituents to get that better understanding of Sikhism. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Questions orales, oral questions. L'honorable chef de l'opposition.
This Prime Minister's incompetence is just not worth the cost. With his excessive spending at the federal level, he has caused so many messes in the military, immigration, inflation, the housing market, and so many more. But instead of cleaning up his own mess, he's just creating more problems with expensive promises that interfere with provincial jurisdiction. Why is this Liberal Prime Minister bringing his incompetence into areas of Quebec competency? The Honourable Minister of Public Services. Mr. Speaker, it's quite humorous to hear the word incompetence in the mouth of the Leader of the Opposition when he was Housing Minister, who created only 6 affordable housing units for the whole country during his term. Recently, he accused Quebec municipalities of being incompetent. On March 15th, with Quebec City, we started 324 affordable housing units. Who's really incompetent here? The Leader of the Opposition with his 6 units, or Quebec municipalities with hundreds? The Honourable Leader of the Opposition. When I was Housing Minister, housing costs were half of what they are today. And hundreds of thousands of housing units were created with low interest rates. Today, we learned that the Bank of Canada will not be lowering interest rates. And the Governor of the Bank of Canada has already said that if governments spend too much, interest rates will remain high, which will send people into bankruptcy. Will this Prime Minister finally accept my common sense plan? A dollar-for-dollar plan to balance the budget and bring down interest rates. The Honourable Minister. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Leader of the Opposition was just talking about the government of Quebec, and I talked about Quebec municipalities. Now, with the Quebec government, we signed an agreement to create 8,000 new affordable housing units. During his term as Housing Minister, the Leader of the Opposition created 6 affordable housing units. And yet, he called Quebec municipalities incompetent. When will he agree to come with me to meet with the Quebec City leaders to apologize in person?
The Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, I'll never apologize for keeping housing costs low when I was the Minister of Housing. But if you were hoping for some interest rate relief today as a mortgage holder, as someone with a small business loan or a line of credit, you got some bad news that the Prime Minister is not worth the cost. Rates are staying high long because, as the Governor of the Bank of Canada said, if government spending grows, then interest rates will have to stay high to combat the resulting inflation. Why won't the Prime Minister accept my common sense plan to fix the budget with a dollar-for-dollar law to bring down rates?
The Honourable President of the Treasury Board.
Mr. Speaker, it's possible to be prudent fiscally and have strong social programs as well. That's exactly what our government does. With the AAA credit rating, with the lowest debt-to-GDP ratio in the G7, and with historically low unemployment. At the same time, we have a national school food program on the table of $1 billion, Mr. Speaker, supports for childcare and early learning, as well as for renters and homeowners. That's what we do on this side of the House. Every day is a great day to fight for Canadians.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Every day is not a great day when you're living in a tent city, or when you've had your mortgage double, or when you are with the families 1 in 4 children who can't get enough food, and they put forward a food program that doesn't have any food. Right. Instead, what they've done is doubled the national debt and driven up interest rates. Today we learned that the Bank of Canada is unable to bring rates down because the Prime Minister continues to make massive multi-billion-dollar inflationary spending. Why won't he follow my common sense plan to bring down the deficit and the rates.
The Honourable President of the Treasury Board.
Mr. Speaker, wages are growing faster than inflation. Under the Conservatives, poverty was up 14.5%. When we replaced the Conservatives, we brought it down to 7.4%. Mr. Speaker, we will continue to invest in Canadians with the supports for affordable housing, for renters, for early learning and childcare, and because of our work, we will make life fairer for Canadians, unlike the Conservative leader who is here for himself. Thank you.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, we're finding out today from the Bank of Canada that the Prime Minister is not worth the cost. In September, the bank governor said that if government spending were to grow, then interest rates would have to stay high. That was echoed by the former bank governor and incoming Liberal leader, Mark Carney, who indicated that he does not expect rates to fall quickly, and that is partly because of a lack of fiscal discipline. So if he won't listen to me, why won't he listen to his successor and understand that he's not worth the cost of high interest rates?
The Honourable Minister for Innovation. The Honourable Minister for Innovation.
Mr. Speaker, I hope the Conservative will listen this time because Canadians are watching at home. Mr. Speaker, we will take no lessons from the Conservative. On this side of the House, we have a plan to build more houses. We have a plan to build more prosperity in this country. We have a plan to create more jobs, Mr. Speaker. On the other side, they have slogan, Mr. Speaker. Canadians are smart. They understand that slogans don't build homes. They understand that slogans don't create jobs. They understand that slogans don't create prosperity. Mr. Speaker, every day is a good day to fight for Canadians. That's what we're going to do.
If this goes on, I'm certain that the honourable member for La Prairie will think that it's about him. The honourable member for La Prairie. Mr. Speaker, for 3 weeks, the Prime Minister has been making pre-budget announcements in Quebec jurisdiction, but not today. Today, he is at the foreign interference inquiry, so he doesn't have time for domestic interference. Health, schools, housing, dental care, childcare. It's the Liberals, not the Bloc, who think they are governing Quebec. Ottawa has the money, but Quebec has the expertise. If Ottawa wants to help Quebec, it should just increase transfers. What is this government waiting for? The Honourable Minister of Public Services and Procurement. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's always a good time to speak about the impacts that government investments have for Quebecers. Let's start with childcare, a $6 billion investment over 4 years, which will help families and especially women. 35,000 new childcare spots, which will of course help families, which will reduce poverty, increase gender equality, help children, all while respecting Quebec jurisdiction. The Honourable Member for La Prairie. Mr. Speaker, this is a real budget striptease, one little piece at a time. At the rate it's going, the budget lockdown on April 16th will be no longer than 5 minutes. There'll be nothing left to announce. And what will be left to spend after using billions of dollars to interfere with Quebec's jurisdiction? I know that competence would interfere with this Liberal government's brand. Look at Phoenix, passports, ArriveCan, asylum seekers, but that's no reason to violate Quebec jurisdiction. Could this government please transfer money instead of interfering. The Honourable Minister. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm very pleased to answer another question to give a second example of how we're working well with Quebec on housing this time. $1.8 billion in an agreement that was signed a few weeks ago that will enable Quebec to build more affordable housing than ever before, which will greatly benefit Quebecers, especially lower-income Quebecers.
The Honourable Member from Burnaby South.
Yesterday, the Assembly of First Nations made it clear that this government is letting down Indigenous people. Right now, the Indigenous funding gap in infrastructure has risen to an astronomical $350 billion. That's not just a number on paper. That means Indigenous people are living in moldy homes. That means Indigenous people don't have access to clean drinking water. Why did this Liberal government turn their back on Indigenous people?
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, for decades and decades, Canada has underinvested in Indigenous communities, and this government is putting a stop to that. We've increased funding for housing on First Nations by 1,100%, Mr. Speaker, and while we know there is a long way to go, I want to thank the AFN for co-writing this report with us. It's very important to understand the size of the gap so that we can work even more quickly to close it together.
It's not just Indigenous people that this government is letting down, it's also Canadians living with disabilities. Right now, Canadians living with disabilities are disproportionately living in poverty. And according to Angus Reid, 90% of Canadians support a Canadian disability benefit. But this Liberal government continues to delay the implementation of this benefit, and the Conservatives voted against it. So why is this government continuing to delay? Enough is enough. When will people get their checks? When will people actually get the benefit?
Here, here.
The Honourable Minister for Diversity, Inclusion and People with Disabilities.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the Honourable Member knows extremely well that Canada Disability Benefit is another concrete step to reduce poverty and to support Canadians who need it the most, Mr. Speaker. This is our top priority. We're on track to deliver the benefit, Mr. Speaker. In the spirit of nothing without us, I want to take an opportunity to thank the disability community for their relentless advocacy and for the work that they have been doing, Mr. Speaker. We will get it right, and we will get it out for Canadians living with disabilities. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member from Dufferin-Caledon.
Tina from Orangeville just sent me a photo from the Orangeville Food Bank. There's no juice, there's no cereal, and there's almost no diapers. This is because the people who used to donate food are now lined up for food. This is actually Canada after 8 years of this corrupt, incompetent NDP Liberal government.
That's right.
Will the Prime Minister finally show he has even a modicum of compassion for Canadians, pass Conservative Bill C-234 that will take all carbon taxes off all farmers so Canadians can once again afford food?
Common sense. The Honourable Minister for Natural Resources and Energy.
It is important in this country, and certainly Canadians understand, that we address the climate crisis that is facing us. There are significant costs that we are facing, including issues around wildfires as we move forward, if we do not address climate change. But it is also important that we do that in a manner that is affordable. 8 out of 10 Canadians get more money back from the carbon rebate than they pay in the price on pollution. If you are going to take it away, as the Leader of the Opposition would do, you are actually attacking the poorest members in our society. Shame on you.
I'm going to ask all members, please, to not take the floor until the person who has the microphone has the opportunity to speak to all members, so we can hear the questions clearly, and we can also hear the answers clearly. The Honourable Member from Dufferin-Caledon.
The great Liberal lies. the budget will balance itself, and the rebate check is larger than the cost of the carbon tax. Everyone knows that is not actually what's happened. And you know who else has joined the carbon tax revolt? 6 premiers in this country who are calling for a carbon tax summit. Newfoundland and Labrador, Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, Ontario, Saskatchewan, and Alberta. Will this out-of-touch Prime Minister actually call this conference the Carbon Tax Summit, or is he too busy hiding because he called the premiers liars?
So, colleagues, I'd like to remind all colleagues on all sides of the House that we must be very careful about using the word lies. Although it wasn't directed at an individual, it is really important that we not use language, as you know, that it can be disturbing and can disturb the affairs of the House. The Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Look, on this side of the House, we actually believe in facts and we believe in science. The honourable member makes statements that actually have zero basis in fact. 200 economists in this country signed a letter last to 2 weeks ago saying that 8 out of 10 Canadians get more money back. The parliamentary budget officer says that 8 out of 10 Canadians get money back. They can make up all of the things that they want to, but the facts are on our side. It is an issue that addresses affordability for Canadians, particularly those on modest incomes. It is a plan to address climate change. Those reckless, irresponsible Conservatives on the other side of the House should be ashamed.
Again, I'd like to remind members to please stay away from language that could be, that certainly it's getting closer and closer to unparliamentary. The Honourable Member from Chilliwack Hope.
After 8 years of this NDP Liberal government, many Canadians can no longer afford to feed their families. Last year, 2 million Canadians visited food banks in a single month alone. But instead of bringing down the cost of food, the Prime Minister increased the carbon tax on groceries by 23% on April 1st. Clearly, this Prime Minister is not worth the cost. Instead of making things worse, will the Prime Minister finally cut the cost of food by adopting Conservative Bill C-234 to take all carbon taxes off of farmers in next week's budget?
That's right.
The Honourable Government House Leader.
It's important that we talk in this House about all of the supports that we're providing to farmers and the agricultural community in the context of our fight against climate change, Mr. Speaker. But I would also point out that after having Conservative senators threaten female senators on amendments on this bill, this is a Conservative private member's bill that they can prioritize at any moment and bring to a vote in this House. It's up to them. C-234's fate is decided on the Conservative side of the House, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member from Chilliwack Hope.
Mr. Speaker, this Liberal government is completely out of touch with ordinary Canadians who can't feed their families with phony Liberal photo ops. Canadians are already lining up at the food banks in record numbers, and increasing the carbon tax on farmers and food is only making things worse. 70% of Canadians want this government to axe the tax, and half a dozen premiers are demanding an emergency meeting on the carbon tax crisis. So will the Prime Minister stop hiding and hold a carbon tax conference with the premiers and listen to their plans to axe the tax?
That's right.
The Honourable Minister for Natural Resources and Energy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Again, I would implore the Conservatives in opposition to actually use facts when they actually make statements. 200 economists in this country have validated the fact that the carbon price is the most efficient way to reduce emissions and is done in a manner that is affordable. When Premier Moe actually came before the committee a couple of weeks ago, journalists actually called the statements that he was making, which are the same as what this fellow is making, a parade of nonsense and completely dishonest. I totally agree.
The Honourable Member for Charlebourg-Haute-Saint-Charles. Mr. Speaker, after 8 years of this Liberal Prime Minister, rents have doubled, and our youth can no longer dream of buying a first home. Record lines at food banks Everything this Prime Minister touches just withers. He's breaking everything in Ottawa, and now he wants to bring his incompetence to Quebec with these centralizing pre-budget announcements. Will the Prime Minister finally understand that this is just making things worse for Quebecers? The Honourable Minister of Housing, Infrastructure and Communities. Mr. Speaker, on the contrary, we are investing to build housing in Quebec. For example, the Accelerated Housing Fund in Quebec has enabled us to sign an agreement with the province, $1.8 billion, to build 8,000 affordable housing units throughout the province. The Conservatives are against that investment. It's incredible. We will continue to invest to improve the situation and build affordable housing more quickly. The Honourable Member, Mr. Speaker, how can we trust this government when we think of the way they manage everything, the border, the armed forces, ArriveCan, EI? Everything this government does goes wrong for 8 years, and now they're adding insult to injury by interfering with Quebec jurisdiction. Does this Prime Minister understand that this will make the situation worse for Quebecers and all Canadians? The Honourable Minister of Public Services. My colleague, the Minister for Housing, spoke about the 8,000 affordable housing units that will be built by Quebec municipalities. We already know that the Leader of the Opposition had 6 affordable housing units built when he was Minister of Housing. And what the member may not know is that his own riding, there is a project that built 163 affordable housing units, which is about 25 times more than his leader managed to build throughout his entire term and throughout the entire country. The Honourable Member for Jonquière. Now, in the expression area of jurisdiction, there's the word jurisdiction. When you have a toothache, you don't call up the barber, and you shouldn't call up the federal government either. Federal dental coverage is still not available, and yet already everyone is mad at Ottawa. Seniors are mad because they were promised free dental care, but instead they're going to have to pay. Dentists are mad because Ottawa is blaming them. And all of this because Ottawa, which knows nothing about the matter, promised free dental care without totting up the bill. Why not instead act like the tooth fairy and slip the money under Quebec's pillow? The Honourable Minister of Health. Mr. Speaker, it is essential that everyone throughout the country and each and every Quebecer can receive dental care. That is our objective, and that is what we will do. In the spirit of cooperation, I will continue to work with the government of Quebec. The Bloc Québécois is always trying to pick arguments and find problems, whereas our government is finding solutions and ensuring that everyone gets the health care they need. The Honourable Member for Jonquière. Mr. Speaker, Ottawa could send money to Quebec's health insurance program for dental care. Quebec is ready to do that, but Ottawa is instead creating red tape, redundancy, and is making everyone mad, even though the program hasn't even started yet. With housing, Ottawa could give the money right away, but instead it's going to lead to a constitutional conflict until 2025. The federal government is not like King Midas. Instead of touching things and they turn to gold, it touches things and they turn to mold. Why continue interfering with Quebec jurisdiction? Why would we let them do that when everything takes longer and is ultimately worse? The Honourable Minister of Health. Mr. Speaker, the system for dental coverage is simple. People will receive a card, and with that card, dentists throughout the country can use the same system as they do with any other kind of dental insurance, and then very easily, patients will receive necessary services. If Quebec wishes to manage the system, that's not a problem. We can work together. However, it's absolutely essential that the service be available immediately for Quebecers, and that's what we'll do.
The honourable member from Battleford's Lloydminster.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. After 8 years of this Prime Minister, Canadians are struggling to put food on the table. Food banks received a record 2 million visits in a single month last year alone, and a million more Canadians are expected to visit food banks again this year. The carbon tax is driving up the cost of groceries and everything else. Struggling families are desperate for relief in next week's budget. So, Mr. Speaker, will the Prime Minister axe the carbon tax on farmers so the food prices can go down?
The Honourable Minister for Natural Resources and Energy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Once again, the Honourable Member is saying things that are devoid of facts, and in fact, what she is proposing will actually take money away from folks who live on modest incomes. 8 out of 10 families get more money back than they pay in the price on pollution, and it works directly inverse to income. It's those people that live on most modest incomes that would be most impacted by their plan to cut the carbon rebate. That is reckless, that is irresponsible, and it puts at risk people who live in this country on modest incomes.
The chair did not hear the comments by the minister. Unfortunately, I wasn't paying attention, but there is so important for members to not use language which can be disturbing to the affairs of the House. The honourable member from Battleford's Lloydminster.
Actually, Mr. Speaker, Canadians are painfully aware that this Prime Minister and his NDP Liberal government are not worth the cost. Last week's carbon tax hike is driving up the cost of gas, groceries, and home heating. Families are struggling, like I said, to put food on the table, and they cannot afford higher costs. Next week's budget must take the foot off the gas of the rising grocery prices. So once again, Mr. Speaker, will the Prime Minister axe the tax on farmers and make food more affordable for Canadians?
Absolutely. The Honourable Minister for Natural Resources and Energy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would suggest to my honourable colleague across the House, who is from the great province of Saskatchewan, that she go and have a conversation with Dr. Brent Dolter at the University of Regina, who has said 8 out of 10 Canadian families get more money back, and it's those that actually live on modest incomes that do the best on a net benefit basis. It is an affordability program, but it is also a program to address the climate crisis, which imperils the future of our children. The fact that these folks have zero plan to address the climate issue and they don't seem to care at all about it is reckless and it is irresponsible.
I'm certain all members would like to listen to the honourable member from Northumberland, Peterborough South ask his question and to receive a question, an answer in response. The honourable member.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, this Prime Minister has a superpower. It's the ability to spend other people's money. But I'd like to remind him that it's not his money he's spending. It's the hard-earned dollars of Canadians. He is clear he has no respect for Canadians or their hard-earned dollars. Mr. Speaker, he's just not worth the cost. Will his government commit to a pay-as-you-go rule in the upcoming budget to help fix the financial disaster they caused?
The Honourable President of the Treasury Board.
Mr. Speaker, an accurate representation of the facts would be the following. First of all, we have a AAA credit rating. That's by an independent, objective observer of our economy. Second of all, with regards to expenditures, we on this side of the House invest in Canadians, especially in vulnerable Canadians. $10 a day child care, early childhood learning and education, a national school program. Meanwhile, they vote against. They vote against dental care. They vote against pharmacare. Mr. Speaker, every day is a great day to fight for Canadians, and that's exactly what we'll do.
The honourable member from Northumberland, Peterborough South.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. While the Liberals deflect, deny, and gaslight, common sense Conservatives will remain laser focused on the affordability crisis. Bill C-234 is back before this House, and the Liberals have a chance to help Canadians by reducing food costs, by reducing the burden on farmers, which will ultimately make everything more affordable. Will they finally give farmers a break? Will they finally give Canadians a break by reducing and eliminating the carbon tax on farmers?
Honourable Government House Leader.
Bill C-234 is a Conservative private member's bill that party can elect to bring to this House for a vote at any time. I would invite the honourable member to talk to his House leadership, and we'll get on with the vote for C-234.
L'honorable député de Rose.
The honourable member for Rosemont-la-Petite-Patrie. Mr. Speaker, rent is expensive, groceries are expensive, everything is expensive. Quebecers are suffering while the CEOs of big grocery stores are gilding their pockets on their backs. Instead of making this lot pay their fair share, the Liberals are giving them a $60 billion gift. Thank you who? Thank you to the Conservatives who gave this money, our money, when they were in power. Money that could be invested in social and affordable housing, in health, or in the fight against the climate crisis. But no, the Liberals prefer to give it to rich CEOs. Why do the Liberals continue to gild the pockets of big business? The Honourable Minister for Innovation. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to thank my colleague for his question. Mr. Speaker, my colleague will admit that we do invest for the most vulnerable Canadians throughout the country. We also invest in childcare, we invest in housing, and my colleague knows full well that the best way to stabilise grocery prices is to have more competitivity in our country. And that is exactly what we have done with the biggest competitivity reform in history. Everyone here knows that we want to help Canadians, and that is what we are doing and what we'll continue to do.
The honourable member from Winnipeg Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Liberals' child care plan forgets child care workers, 96% whom are women, many facing a burnout crisis. And the recent Liberal announcement falls short of what experts are calling for. Childhood educators need better wages and working conditions to improve retention and recruitment. Meanwhile, the Conservatives are pushing privatized child care that would even hurt workers even more. When will the minister stop with the disrespect and deliver a workforce strategy that allows workers to live in dignity?
The Honourable Minister for Families, Children and Social Development.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank my colleague for the question and her continued advocacy on behalf of early learning childcare workers. Our government continues to work with the provinces and territories, as evidenced most recently with our budget announcement, which includes loan forgiveness for early childhood educators who choose to work in rural and remote communities where we see the need for more educators and more childcare spaces. We'll continue to work on the workforce strategies with the provinces and territories to support this workforce.
The honourable member from St. John's East.
Mr. Speaker, tourism is one of the most important pillars of Atlantic Canada's economy. In my riding of St. John's East, the Bell Island Heritage Society #2 Mine Tour and Community Museum is a hidden gem. Recognized as a world-class destination, they are helping attract tourists to experience for themselves what our community has to offer. This, in turn, supports our local economy. Can the Minister for CORT tell us what efforts are being made to help our booming tourism sector grow even more, specifically in Atlantic Canada?
The Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Big things are happening on the East Coast. In February, I was with the Minister of Tourism to announce the signing of the Atlantic Canada Agreement on Tourism. This $30 million agreement gives a major boost to more than 7,500 tourism businesses throughout Atlantic Canada. This support creates year-round opportunities, fuels innovative marketing, grows our Indigenous product, and brings more visitors to our beautiful corner of the world. With their breathtaking landscapes, delectable cuisine, and renowned hospitality, our region has so much to offer, and we're pulling out all the stops. You put Atlantic Canada on your bucket list this year.
The honourable member for Louis Saint Laurent. Mr. Speaker, after 8 years, this Prime Minister is simply not worth the cost. $500 billion later, and without controlling spending, this is the result. The cost of rent has doubled. 1 child in 4 in Canada does not have enough to eat, and 2 million Canadians have to go to food banks. That is the Liberal record after 8 years of this Prime Minister's mismanagement. And because the Prime Minister has invaded provincial jurisdictions, Quebecers' lives have become worse. The same for Canadians' lives. Will the Prime Minister withdraw from provincial jurisdictions and stop making life worse for Quebecers and Canadians? The Honourable Minister for Public Services and Procurement. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My colleague is right to speak about the cost of living. The cost of living is important for middle-class families and lower-class families. What is interesting is that they are against childcare benefits that reduce child poverty by 50% every month. They're against dental care for children and now for seniors. They are against investments in childcare services that in Quebec have shown us how important it is for gender equality, and now they seem to be against investments in housing, despite the fact that the Conservative leader didn't do much for housing when he was a housing minister. The Honourable Member for Louis Saint Laurent. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to mention to the Minister that most things that he mentioned we voted for. However, what makes us angry and what makes Canadians angry is that this government has absolutely no efficiency when it comes to taking care of its own business. Passports, the armed forces, the border, immigration, the cost of living, and the cost of living. The list is long, Mr. Speaker. That is government in action. And what's this government doing right now? It's butting into provincial jurisdictions. It's not their business. So they can't even handle their own business, but they try to get into provincial businesses. When will the government finally step up and respect its own jurisdictions rather than butting into provincial jurisdictions? The Honourable Minister for Public Services and Procurement. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. First of all, I would like to remind my honourable colleague that in his riding there are about 12,000 families who every month, on the 20th of every month, get the Canada Childcare Benefit. That's about $500 every month, non-taxable for these families, which reduces poverty by 50% in his riding. Unfortunately, one of the first things that the Conservatives did in 2016 was to vote against this childcare benefit that is beneficial to millions of families and children in his riding in Canada. The Honourable Member for Mégantic-L'Érable. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. After 8 years, this Prime Minister is simply not worth the cost of his own incompetence. His inflationary policies have increased the cost of everything. Rent has doubled. Inflation has reached record levels. Violent crimes make our streets less and less safe. Quebecers have less and less purchasing power after having almost shattered in Ottawa. Now, the Prime Minister has passed the last 2 weeks announcing that he now wants to shatter various provinces, including Quebec. Can the Prime Minister simply just mind his own business for once? The Honourable Minister for Innovation. Mr. Speaker, what we hear is the party of inaction speak to us. If we were to listen to the Conservatives, Mr. Speaker, to do nothing is to solve all the problems. No, Mr. Speaker, the people watching us at home know that we have to invest in housing, that we have to invest in childcare, that we have to invest in a green future. And if he wants to talk about success, let us just look at the biggest private investment in Quebec in history. We managed to attract the biggest investment in Quebec in history. We believe that to invest is to succeed, not only today, but in the future as well. The Honourable Member from Mégantic-L'Érable. Like the Minister has often said, people at home knows that after 8 years, the Prime Minister is the only one responsible for his own incompetence, his own field of incompetence. It's not for nothing that Quebec doesn't want him to have him around anymore. He wanted to interfere in housing, and Quebecers have seen the price of their rent double. He wanted to interfere in the lives of the middle class, and he's shattered young people's dream of becoming homeowners one day. And now workers, middle-class workers, have to turn to food banks. When the Prime Minister interferes, Quebecers foot the staggering bill. Will the Prime Minister finally listen to common sense and put aside his plans to meddle further in areas where he has clearly shown he has absolutely no skill or competence? The Honourable Minister for Innovation. Mr. Speaker, I don't think that when it comes to competency and skill, we have any lessons to learn for the Conservatives. Every time we have been here for Canadians, the Conservatives have always voted against. They're against childcare. They're against investments in housing. They're against investments for seniors. Mr. Speaker, if we were to listen to the Conservatives, we would say no to everything. But no, in today's real world, those who are doing well are investing in our country. We're investing in healthcare, in education, and in housing, Mr. Speaker. Those who are confident will invest in their population. That's what we do, Mr. Speaker. The Honourable Member for Longueuil-Saint-Hubert. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There are many tangible measures we can take to tackle the housing crisis. I proposed 12 of them this very morning, and I'm ready to discuss them with the Liberals at any time. They have my number. Because Their only measure right now is to impose ill-conceived conditions upon the provinces, otherwise Ottawa will cut off the funds. The Prime Minister is bluntly telling the provinces that refuses blackmail. You want us to respect your areas of jurisdiction? Then do without federal money. Mr. Speaker, it's our money. In short, no concrete measures, just threats to the provinces and municipalities. So is this the Liberals' plan? It sounds like a Conservative plan. The Honourable Minister for Development. Mr. Speaker, I'm happy to hear the question from my colleague because I read the report that he's mentioned and he worked upon that report. In the report, he put forth a number of stakeholders, and these stakeholders have spoken positively of housing rights interveners that have commended the fact that we want to build more houses. Here, we're not going to just write reports, we're going to build houses. The Honourable Member for Longueuil-Saint-Hubert. Mr. Speaker, Ottawa's conditions aren't speeding up housing construction, they're slowing them down. Instead of paying the money now so that Quebec can actually go to work, the Liberals are bickering until 2025. The money they're holding back is for infrastructure like waterworks and waterways. That's the first step. Unless the Liberals want, perhaps, housing without drinking water on a wasteland. Imagine, we're just at the stage of putting in running water. We're not even talking about building buildings yet, and already the federal government is hampering everything, slowing everyone down. So why not just pay the money now and tackle the housing crisis right now? The Honourable Minister. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The whole light blue, dark blue rhetoric over on the other side, it's all the same. We can't on the one hand say that we want to help people and then vote against, or say that you're going to vote against measures that we have announced this week. The one that he has just mentioned is in last week's announcements. We have announced a fund to help house builders, a fund to defend renter rights. We've announced a fund to make sure that we will have an industrial catalogue to build more rapidly. Mr. Speaker, on this side of the House, we're not just writing reports, we're building houses. The Honourable Member for Bellechasse-les-Échemins-Lévis. Mr. Speaker, under the Liberals, 1 child in 4 goes hungry after 8 years. The cost of housing has doubled. People are sleeping in tents, and the use of food banks has now become the norm. The Prime Minister is failing in his own responsibilities, and his inflationary spending is creating chaos. And he has the sheer nerve to lecture the provinces by invading their areas of jurisdiction with his incompetency. Will the Prime Minister listen to the Premier of Quebec, who is urging him to withdraw from our area of jurisdiction and simply mind his own business for once? The Honourable Minister for Public Services and Procurement. Yes, Mr. Speaker, we're happy to do so with the collaboration of the municipalities of Quebec, including Lévis and the Government of Quebec. 8,000 affordable housing units over the next few months. That is the highest level of affordable housing units built by a government for Quebec since the beginning of Quebec's inception. And that is why we're working hand in hand with the Government of Quebec. They're talking about fields of jurisdiction and competencies, but the least competent is the leader of the Conservatives, who, in his time, built 6 entire housing units.
Member from St. Albert, Edmonton. Excuse me, St. Albert, Edmonton.
Yes.
Thank you.
Mr. Speaker, yesterday at the public inquiry, it was confirmed that CSIS briefed top Liberal officials that Beijing interfered in the nomination on behalf of the member for Don Valley North. Today, the Globe and Mail is reporting that a top Liberal broke the law by leaking classified information that resulted in the member for Don Valley North being tipped off that he was being monitored by CSIS. So who broke the law? What is the name of that top Liberal?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Public Safety.
Speaker, thank you. I thank the member for the question. In regards to the fact that, unfortunately, foreign interference is a problem that some foreign state actors have taken to try to undermine our democracy. But, Mr. Speaker, it's not new, and that's precisely why we have taken this matter so seriously. It's precisely why we have initiated a number of steps to strengthen our democracy. And, Mr. Speaker, we've all agreed to the inquiry, and we want to allow that work to continue so Canadians have a full picture of the issues around foreign interference.
The honourable member from St. Albert, Edmonton.
Mr. Speaker, that non-answer is completely unacceptable. Enough of the cover-up. Only a handful of Liberal officials were briefed by CSIS. We now know that a top Liberal broke the law, undermined the work of CSIS, and put the partisan interests of the Liberal Party ahead of national security. So, when did the Prime Minister first learn of this criminal leak, and did he refer it to the RCMP?
True. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Public Safety.
Mr. Speaker, all parties in this House agreed to the terms of reference for Justice HoC's inquiry. Mr. Speaker, it's important for Canadians and all members of this House that foreign interference is not partisan. It's important that we allow Justice HoC to continue in this work so that Canadians can have a full picture surrounding any attempts of foreign interference in this country. Mr. Speaker, an interim report will be delivered in May, and I look forward to the recommendations on how we can strengthen our democracy.
The honourable member from Yukon.
Mr. Speaker, our government signed bilateral agreements with all 13 provinces and territories this past March. A few weeks ago, in my riding, 3 agreements were announced with the territorial governments to invest a total amount of nearly $86 million to improve health care, access and services for the Yukon. Can you elaborate on what this health investment means for those living in the Yukon and for all Canadians, to the Minister of Health? Thank you.
I'm certain that the honourable member from Yukon wasn't asking the Speaker to elaborate, but indeed the Minister of Health to elaborate. The Honourable Minister of Health.
You, Mr. Speaker, would also be very enthusiastic about the bilateral agreements that have been signed across this country, and I want to thank the member for Yukon, not only for his extraordinary work as a member of Parliament, but as a physician and a chief medical officer, the work that he's done to promote public health and better health for Canadians across the country really has to be commended. And I was so proud to be with him in the Yukon to make an announcement that's going to see more doctors, more nurses, reduce backlog, improve access to care, make sure that we allow our seniors to age at home. It's part of a $200 billion plan to take action across the country.
The honourable member from Leeds, Grenville, Thousand Islands and Rideau Lakes.
After 8 years of this NDP Liberal Prime Minister, we know that he's not worth the cost or the corruption, and we've seen that with the $60 million that he spent on his failed Arrive scam. Last year alone, he spent $21 billion on outside consultants, and his favorite hand-picked consultants, GC Strategies, are being hauled before the bar of this House to answer questions under threat of imprisonment for lying to parliamentarians in the inquiries about this Liberal scandal. It's a historic tool for historic levels of corruption. So in the budget next week, will the Prime Minister cut the corruption in his government?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Public Safety.
Mr. Speaker, as we have said time and time again, when it comes to the procurement process, Canadians and all parliamentarians expect the process to be followed, expect laws to be followed, and Mr. Speaker, this is precisely why we have supported the work of the committee. CBSA has already initiated a number of measures to improve the procurement process. Mr. Speaker, we will continue to make those improvements so Canadians have trust in our procurement systems.
The honourable member from Leeds, Grenville, Thousand Islands and Rideau Lakes.
The procurement system that they're presiding over is so broken that millions of dollars are being paid to firms who add no value and do no work to contracts. Just last year, $21 billion on outside contracts, and this NDP Liberal government isn't worth the cost or the corruption of their $60 million Arrive scam that saw GC Strategies paid $20 million but did no work and added no value. For their failed Arrive scam, Canadians got lies, fraud, and forgery. Will they cut the corruption in their budget next Wednesday?
The And ask all members, please, to not take the floor while another member is speaking. That's recognized by the Speaker. In particular, I might ask the member from, I believe it is from Timmins James Bay, to please make sure that his comments are only done when he has the microphone, or when he has the floor. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Public Safety.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's ironic coming from Conservatives that these very same companies that were also awarded contracts under Conservative leadership for millions of dollars, that Conservatives did nothing to fix the procurement process. But, Mr. Speaker, rest assured, Canadians can know that our government takes this exceptionally seriously. It's precisely why we've already implemented changes, something that Conservatives ignored for years. We are not going to do that. We are going to build trust in the procurement system, something Conservatives have failed.
The Honourable Member from Sherwood Park, Fort Saskatchewan.
Mr. Speaker, this House will make history when one of the favourite contractors of this NDP Liberal government is hauled before the bar. The Parliamentary Secretary just said that GC Strategies got contracts from Conservatives. Actually, Speaker, you know when GC Strategies was founded? In 2015. Wow. The company was founded in 2015, and they did extensive business with this Liberal government. It couldn't get a sole source for the Arrive Scam app. So can the government explain why this company got so much work after being founded in the same year that they took government? And will this government finally cancel their costly criminal corruption?
The Honourable Government House Leader.
The member across knows not to use such language, and he knows that there's no evidence for the kind of language that he's using that supports that. The government, as well as opposition parties, all voted to bring this gentleman before the bar of the House of Commons, expecting answers. Parliamentarians are entitled to answers. We voted to get the answers just like they did, Mr. Speaker. Thank you.
Right. Pretty straight.
The Honourable Member from Winnipeg South Centre.
Mr. Speaker, our government has been unwavering in its support for our ally Ukraine. With the values of all democracies threatened by Russia's illegal invasion, we have been there every step of the way, doing our part to ensure Ukrainian victory. My riding of Winnipeg South Centre is home to thousands of Canadians of Ukrainian descent, and in recent months we have welcomed thousands more fleeing the war back home. Earlier this year, this House passed the Canada-Ukraine Free Trade Agreement. Unfortunately, Conservative opposition prevented this Parliament from signalling unanimous support. There is good news, however, Mr. Speaker. Can the Minister of International Trade inform this House of important developments related to this critical and...
The Honourable Minister for International Trade.
I want to inform Canadians and this House that in Ukraine and Ukraine Parliament have passed the Canada-Ukraine Free Trade Agreement. Despite Conservative opposition, Ukraine's Parliament unanimously passed this agreement and have called this agreement one of the most modern, high-standard agreements in the world. I'm looking forward to putting this Canada-Ukraine Free Trade Agreement in use because I'm going to take a business delegation to Ukraine so we can work on their rebuilding. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Well done.
I know it's Wednesday and people are all excited. Let's have the last couple of questions. The Honourable Member from Courtenay, Alberta.
Mr. Speaker, First Nations in BC have suffered enormous loss through their 200-year history of colonization, including the devastating loss of language and culture. Although nations continue to make tremendous progress revitalizing their languages, the Liberals' new formula on funding means a 60% cut to language programs in BC. Preserving and revitalizing Indigenous languages is an essential step to reconciliation. Will this government remember its most important relationship with First Nations and act with urgency to ensure sustained and long-term funding to language programs in British Columbia?
The Honourable Minister for Indigenous Services.
Well, Mr. Speaker, let me just first say that I fully agree with the member opposite about the need to preserve Indigenous languages and restore them when they've been so cruelly ripped away from First Nations communities for decades. Indeed, Mr. Speaker, in my own riding, Mattawa Tribal Council provides First Nation language training and support for First Nations communities all through Northern Ontario, supported by this federal government. I'm very proud of the work they're doing, and we will continue to work on this preservation with First Nations across the country.
The honourable member from Spadina, Fort York.
Speaker, the government's defence policy, Our North Strong and Free, is the latest in Liberal smoke and mirrors. It rightfully abbreviates into NSF, which Canadians know means non-sufficient funds. Spread out 20 years, it has insufficient funds, and by insufficient, I mean $0 this year. There's nothing for tactical helicopters, maritime sensors, and military housing. Mr. Speaker, with CAF members using food stamps and sleeping in tents, Liberals provided nothing for housing in 2024 and 2025. Is the Prime Minister aware that his facade policy will keep CAF personnel and their families in tents for years?
The Honourable Minister for National Defence.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And perhaps I should send a copy of our new policy update for defence to the member opposite, because it's quite clear he hasn't read it. But what I can tell this House, Mr. Speaker, is this is a historic investment in new capabilities, in maintaining the equipment, in ensuring that we can not only support the members of the Canadian Armed Forces, but also grow our numbers. There is money for housing. There is money for other supports. And, Mr. Speaker, there is a new focus for the Canadian Armed Forces in the defence of Canada that will make us strong at home to help us be strong around the world.
Et voici la fin de la période.
That ends question period. I understand. I believe there is a point of order. I recognize the member for Beloeil-Chambly. Mr. Speaker, there has been consultations amongst the parties, and I think that you will see unanimous consent for the following motion: that this House recognize that the Member of Parliament for Bécancour, Nicolet Sorel, has become, on April 3rd, 2024, the longest-serving and undefeated elected official in the history of the Canadian Parliament, on his 14,457th day in office. That is 39 years, 6 months, and 29 days. Salutes the dedication that he has had to show to the citizens of Bécancour, Nicolet Sorel, to earn their trust since 1984 in 12 federal elections, and thanks the member for Bécancour, Nicolet Sorel, Dean of the House, for his record length of public service over 4 historic decades dedicated to the defense of the people of Quebec. Pay tribute to the member for Bécancour, Nicolet Sorel, immediately following the adoption of this order, to allow members to make a short statement in the following order: a member of the Bloc Québécois, followed by a member of the recognized party, a member of the Green Party, and the member for Bécancour, Nicolet Sorel. However, I cannot presume that the House's decision, so I will ask the question that all those opposed to what the honourable member is proposing will say nay. Agreed. The House has heard the terms of the motion. All those opposed to the motion will please say nay. Adopted. Carried.
En conséquence, la Chambre procédera maintenant à...
Accordingly, the House will now proceed to tributes for the member for Bécancour, Nicolet Sorel. I now recognize the honourable member for Beloeil-Chambly. Pursuant to order made earlier today, we are going to be proceeding directly to that speech, according to what we just adopted.
Je donne maintenant la parole à l'honorable.
I now recognize the honourable member for Beloeil-Chambly. Mr. Speaker, We could touch on the member's age. We could. We know he has a good sense of humor. But instead, I will discuss the length of his reign as the member for his extraordinary riding. Now, we could speak of his wisdom, the great wisdom of the member for Bécancour-Nicolet-Sorel. But no, I won't. I won't speak of that. I would say that after all these years, the member has not attained wisdom. He's someone with a great deal of humor, sometimes mischievous. He's an endless source of anecdotes. He's a deeply endearing and generous person. When I was thinking about running for leader of the party, one of the first people I consulted was the member for Bécancour-Nicolet-Sorel. I followed his advice, and I think I did the right thing. And so, I will be forgiven for my breach of decorum by saying, thank you, Louis.
Louis. J'invite le député de Gatineau.
I would now invite the member for Gatineau, the government house leader, to take the floor. Thank you. It is my turn now to rise and speak about the record longevity in this house of the Dean of the House, the member for Député, the member for Bécancour-Nicolet-Sorel, rather. Over 4 decades, my bloc colleague has admirably promoted the interests of his constituents. On April 3rd, and I would just mention our former colleague, Herb Gray, who held the record until now, on April 3rd, he became the elected official who has sat the longest in this House without interruption or any defeat. During the entire history of the Canadian Parliament, it's an exploit that my colleague may be very proud of. His constituents clearly trust him and have since 1984. That's quite an extraordinary batting average, all these consecutive re-elections. He also shows that in this House we can disagree without being disagreeable. His long tenure should inspire all of us. Inspire us to adopt his excellent qualities, and also perhaps hope to aspire to such a record. I would also like to mention his appreciation for institutions, even federal institutions. We have worked together on the Centre Bloc Rehabilitation Project. It is the gem, the heart of our democracy in Canada. And I would like to thank my colleague for the great commitment that he's shown in supporting our institutions, and perhaps even the supreme federal institution. Once again, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to congratulate the Dean of the House, a very proactive and engaged member who is appreciated by his colleagues and his constituents, as this record proves. Thank you.
L'honorable député de Bellechasse-les-Etchemins-Lévis.
The honourable member for Bellechasse-les-Etchemins-Lévis. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Our party will join our colleagues to congratulate our colleague for Bécancour-Nicolet-Sorel for his long tenure. I would just like to remind us that at the beginning, he was a conservative. But enough teasing. I'd just like to say that it takes a great deal of time. It takes a great deal of effort to hold a position as an elected official. I am coming up on 20 years, and I know that it can be difficult and that it takes a great deal of time. So it's hard to fathom doing double of that time, 40 years. It shows a great deal of sacrifice and abnegation. And also his family has also had to sacrifice a great deal. I'd also like to thank, therefore, his family and everyone who supported him for all these years. Of course, we're all taking notes because we might all hope to have such a tenure, but it's unusual, of course. In the National Assembly of Quebec, where I started and was a politician for nearly 15 years, it was said that the average term for a member was about 6 years. So for Louis, if I may be allowed to call him that, we may say that he is beating all the statistics. I would like to congratulate you on behalf of all my colleagues. And in conclusion, I would just say, after all these years, I'm quite sure that this member for the Bloc knows the Canadian national anthem by heart.
L'honorable député de Rosemont-la-Petite-Patrie.
The honourable member for Rosemont-la-Petite-Patrie. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm very pleased to rise in this House to pay tribute to the hard work of the member for Bécancour, Nicolas Sorel. He was elected 12 times in a row without ever losing in his riding. That's remarkable. He was elected for the first time in 1984 with the progressive conservative wave under the late Brian Mulroney. Where was I back then? I was 11 years old. I was finishing up primary school. And in fact, I was younger than my youngest child is now. The member for Bécancour, Nicolas Sorel, is someone who has a great sense of humor and is a bit mischievous. And I would just like to say that on Wikipedia, it says that for 6 days last fall, he was acting Speaker of this House. So for 6 days, a member of the Bloc Québécois was reporting in theory to Charles III, King of England, that he conscientiously served for those 6 days. But more importantly, he conscientiously served his constituents for more than 14,000 consecutive days. That shows the importance of knowledge of what's going on the ground. It shows a knowledge and trust in local democracy. On behalf of the NDP, I'd like to congratulate my colleague.
Je pense que ça en dit long quand on voit quelqu'un qui a ses...
Yes, it speaks well when someone has personal preferences but still respects institutions. And now I'd like to give the floor to the member for Saanich Gulf Islands. Mr. Speaker, I'm so pleased to join my voice to my colleagues and thank our dear friend and colleague, the member for Bécancour, Nicolas Sorel. When I was elected in 2011, I was here all by myself as only member for the Green Party. But I would work with the 4 members of the Bloc Québécois at the time. We worked closely in the background. I think we were almost like a tiny coalition, the Green Bloc Québécois. So I'm very pleased to continue working with my dear colleague, the Dean of this House. He has worked with many different prime ministers, with many colleagues, under many different parliaments, always in a spirit of collaboration. He's a friendly and caring person. He has a great sense of humor. He's always a collaborator. I am very fond of him. Thank you.
et ça me donne un très grand privilège à reconnaître.
It is my great privilege to recognize the member for Bécancour Nicolet-Sorel. Well, I'm at a loss for words after hearing all this. I'd like to thank all 5 colleagues who spoke and who said very nice things about me. Indeed, I have been part of the governing party. I've been an independent. I have been in the official opposition. And I have been a member of the 3rd biggest party. So I've been around the block, so to speak. I've experienced highs and lows. I'd like to thank my constituents who have supported me and given me majorities over 4 elections. 2011 was more challenging due to the orange wave, but there were 4 of us, including me. I would like to thank everyone who facilitated my election, organizers, the riding association, the members who renew every single year. They're getting a bit older, too. My office staff, who have been very loyal, as well as the research and communication teams that support parties and members. Their work is of great use and help us to better serve our constituents. And they help us give our constituents the answers that they need. I'd like to thank my family. I'd like to thank my children, who were understanding about my many absences. I'd like to thank my spouse, Manon.
Bonbon et cancer.
She is bravely fighting cancer and has been for 2 years.
Bonbon et cancer avec.
She has been bravely fighting cancer for 2 years, and despite all of the treatments, she's continuing to encourage me to do my work here and to help my constituents. She has shown a great deal of support to me. I'm sure many people here today will beat my own record because many were elected very young. But I would like to tell them right now that I hope to add 2 or 3 terms to my record. That is my intention. But I will no longer be changing party.